Welcome to the 35th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with Ryan Brown, author of the zombie football novel, Play Dead. And yes, you heard me right, zombie football. Stay tuned for my interview.
Well, this is Jeffrey Deaver, author of most recently The Burning Wire, and soon to be author of the next continuation James Bond novel. I spend a lot of time writing, a lot of time researching my books, but when I'm not doing that, I love listening to the Reading and Writing Podcast, which you can hear at readingandwritingpodcast.com.
Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest tonight is Ryan Brown, author of the new horror novel, Play Dead, available in bookstores now. In addition to his success as a first-time novelist, Brown has also achieved success as an actor, acting in Law & Order Special Victims Unit, Young and the Restless, and The Guiding Light. Welcome to the podcast, Ryan.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Well, as a huge horror and zombie fiction fan and an equally passionate football fan, when I saw the cover of your book, Play Dead, a cover that depicts a zombie wearing a football helmet, I loved it immediately. For the listeners who haven't heard of Play Dead, can you first give them a sense of what the book is about? And also, how did you get the idea of combining zombies with football?
Well, Play Dead is a story. It's a zombie football story, as you say, a little bit different from a typical zombie story in that the zombies are actually sort of proved to be the good guys in this. They're actually the guys that you pull for. It takes place in small town Texas, in East Texas, a fictional town. And the seed for the whole thing actually sort of came about several years ago when the steroid scandals really started breaking in professional sports. With the Mark McGuires and so on, the ones that were brought up and questioned before Congress and all this stuff.
Right.
A lot of the things that you heard from these athletes, which is understandable. I don't think it's necessarily justifiable, but was the idea that they were taking steroids basically to keep up with others who were on the field taking the steroids. It's like once you put them out there, you're left with no choice if you truly want to compete. This was their reason for doing it, and it just kind of scared me as a sports fan. I hate the idea of performance enhancers or whatever, steroids and everything. And I thought, well, God, that's a really scary thing, because basically it's like to compete with these monsters on steroids, you have to become a monster. And that's really where the seed came. And then I just from there, I just sort of let loose and started having fun with it and started thinking, okay, if you could have, the most juiced up team that you can possibly imagine, what would be the only thing that could possibly compete against that? And I thought, well, it's got to be something that's real, an athlete that's strong, fearless, doesn't feel pain, the more I talked about it, I was like, I'm talking about zombies. So that's really how the whole thing came about. And then I decided to set it in a high school setting as opposed to a professional sports setting, just because, for one thing, I am from Texas and I grew up in that sort of environment, and the Friday Night Lights mentality is it's really a true thing. It's that serious in these environments, and it's that big of a deal, and it just seemed like a good place to set it for that reason, and also just because it was familiar ground for me.
Right. Friday Night Lights with zombies.
Exactly.
Did you ever play football yourself?
I didn't play. And I'm 6'2", and I was always an athletic guy, but I went to a school of 3,000 people. My school played for the Texas 5A championship when I was my sophomore year, and basically I was too small. I loved it. What I did, my job, and how I made my money, as opposed to mowing lawns or whatever, what have you, what normally people would do in high school. I shot video for the Booster Club and for the coach's game film. And so I basically spent 4 years in high school viewing it and watching it and observing it through a viewfinder, not knowing that some 20 years later I'd be putting it to use. But I was a fan. Absolutely love the environment of high school football.
Sure.
And so I wasn't a player, but I was definitely always around it.
So do you watch football now? Who's your team?
Well, having grown up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I'm a Cowboys fan, which isn't anything to be proud of at the moment, unfortunately. And then I went to college at the University of Oklahoma, so I'm an Oklahoma Sooners fan as well.
Gotcha. Well, I'm a huge Jets fan, but I won't hold the
okay.
Cowboys against you.
Please don't. And of course, I live in New York.
Yeah,
but it's not ever easy. I've got my 7-year-old son. Of course, I've made him a Cowboys fan, and we love to wear our hats and our jerseys around on game days and everything. And it's never very difficult to hear harsh words from the New Yorkers, which I can certainly understand.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned earlier, you've had success as an actor. I'm curious, have you always been interested in writing, or did you get the idea for Play Dead and decide to give it a try?
Well, I did. I was an actor for a number of years without any thought of ever writing, and I actually started, actually got into writing and was able to do Play Dead just because I had a lot of time between jobs. I was fortunate enough to be able to make a living as an actor for a number of years, but there came a time where I was between jobs and really, got back to the survival jobs, which everybody does. I was bartending again. And just sort of had the time on my hands, and that was when the seed for this story came up, and I just sat down and sort of did it on a lark and thought, well, I've got the time, and I certainly need a creative outlet while there's not any acting work happening for me at the moment. So I didn't plan on ever getting into writing. I sort of fell into it, I think, but once I got into it, I definitely think that, my years acting, at the end of the day, a lot of acting is developing character and taking what's on the script and building characters around it and making them as truthful as you can. So I think it was inevitable that a lot of the stuff that I learned and worked with as an actor sort of, came across in the writing.
Sure. Since you were an actor, did you ever think about writing a screenplay or a script?
Actually I did, and when I toyed with the idea of making it a screenplay, and then it once the further I got into it.
Hello?
Very much, I think, a director's medium, whereas I wanted something, if I was going to work as a writer, I wanted something where I was able to tell the story to the fullest that I could, and I just found that because the screenplay is so limited to the things that you say and the people like cinematographers and costumers and all the people that are that make movies, they fill in a lot of the stuff that is on the page with the script, which is great. And if you're a screenwriter and want to do that, that's terrific. I found myself wanting to put it all on the page. I wanted to do the descriptions myself and wanted to
So what was the writing process like for you when you were working on Play Dead? Did you find yourself being a writer who wanted to outline the entire novel, or just jump in and kind of see where things take you?
It's one of those things, because I hadn't done it before. I was sort of learning as I went, and did I want to outline? Yes. Did I find myself really struggling with that? And yes. And so I really did sit down and try and outline it, and I found that I kind of needed to get some paint on the canvas before I started reworking it. So I pretty much just sort of wrote a draft and let it, from beginning to end, and let it, go where it may. Now, I certainly had a lot of work to do, after that. And then I sort of outlined. So I would say I did write a draft from beginning to end, almost just writing it, letting it, take me where it went. And then I sort of took that, and based on that, sort of wrote an outline for how it was as it was written, and then changed the outline, saw the problems and then changed the outline. So I didn't outline before the first draft, but I definitely did after the first draft. But it was trial and error, having never done it before. It was, I was sort of figuring it out as I went.
Right. Who are some of the writers that you enjoy reading?
Well, I read all over the map. I mean, I really, having written a zombie football book, right now I'm reading Eat, Pray, Love because my wife read it and said, "Oh, you should read this." Which, anybody who reads Play Dead this guy wouldn't think would read that. But I read a lot of nonfiction. I read a lot of fiction and everything. But I would definitely say that the writers that influenced me as far as the type of book that I have written here. Certainly, I mean, it's unavoidable. Stephen King. I certainly grew up, like a lot of kids my age, just reading him. We used to pass his books around in high school and everything. I'm a big Robert McCammon fan. Boy's Life is one of my favorite books. That certainly influenced me a lot.
He's an amazing writer. Boy's Life is an amazing book. I've actually given it away as gifts several times.
It's one of my all-time favorites. I mean, it's probably the book that I've read the most times of anything. And I think I read it at the first time. The first time I read it, I was about the age of 4, it was 12 or 13, and I subsequently read it a number of times. But he's a big influence. I love Joe Lansdale, a fellow Texan, and I love his writing. But I really got. I love Robert B. Parker. I love his Western books and everything. So I definitely have influences. But I would say probably the three that I drew from in writing this would probably be King, McCammon, and Joe Lansdale.
Sure. What are you working on now? Are you writing another novel?
I'm working on another book. It's not a follow-up. It's a completely separate story from Play Dead, but it's sort of what I've done with what I was hoping to do anyway with the zombie and horror genre, and sort of try and give it a new spin. I'm now doing with Western, actually, but it's sort of a modern-day Western. I'm sort of bringing the conventions of the old classic Western and putting them in a modern-day story. Where there's not a whole lot that I can say other than I've sort of written it in such a way that we have John Wayne alive in present day.
Interesting. And is that scheduled for publication? Does that have a title?
Yeah, in May. That's scheduled for publication in May of 2011. It's called Thunder Without Rain. Thunder Without Rain? Yeah.
Great. Where can people find more info about you online if they're interested in finding out more about Play Dead and your
I do have a website, ryanbrownauthor.com, which has a lot of information, all this appearances and just stuff going on. I keep a monthly news and everything. So ryanbrownauthor.com will probably give you the most bit of information. Then my author profile at the simonandschuster.com website also has quite a bit of information. There's an interview on there, and it's got there's quite a bit that can be found there. And then I also have a Facebook page, Ryan Brown Author, as well.
Great. Well, again, I've been speaking with Ryan Brown, author of the new horror novel Play Dead, which is a mixture of zombies and football and a whole lot of fun. Thanks a lot for doing this interview, Ryan.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. I really appreciate you having me.
This is Lee Child, and I'm listening to the Reading and Writing Podcast.
Thanks for listening to my latest podcast. If you have a chance, please leave a review of the podcast in iTunes. It only takes a moment. Until next time, read some good books and be well.